kids these days. You know, they've got their Minecraft, they've got their Tic Tac, their Fortnites. And Maddie, you got one White Dwarf magazine a year. And if you were lucky, there was a free Chaos Warrior stuck on one of the wee plastic bags on the front. I wonder if any newsagents' apprentices would quietly steal those and build their own armies with them. I probably would have done that. Anyway, I do digress. I was moaning about kids these days, wasn't I? In all seriousness though, can a slow, deep, patient hobby like ours hope to compete for the attention of young people now that we live in the grim darkness of the far future? There's so many other distractions out there now, and I know people say that we had computers and televisions when we were wee, but you didn't walk about with your Commodore 64 in your pocket, did you? And it didn't have the internet on it. It had Dizzy, which took 45 minutes to load on a cassette. You could paint a miniature in that time, if the newsagent's apprentice hadn't stolen it, that is. And another thing, you didn't binge every episode of Nightmare or the Thundercats in one sitting on Netflix, did you? So the point is, things are a lot different now. Things are a lot more immediate. But all isn't lost. On this episode, I'm joined by a lovely chap called Mark, who filled out our Tabletop Miniature Hobbyist survey over at bedroombattlefields.com/survey. He raised a few of these points, which led to us having a bit of back and forth, and I thought it'd be really good to invite him on and do an episode about it. So, welcome to the show, Mark. What's on the painting table at the moment?
So, I'm actually just doing a selection of just nice, cheap plastic figures to try and make a dwarf and a goblin army, just because it's something that I never did when I was a kid, and it always felt like I couldn't afford it or I didn't have the time. And I've got these really cheap little. Have you seen the EM4 miniatures?
Yeah, I'm aware of them.
And
yeah,
they're like 20p each or something like that, and you get like a little monopose, 3 different orcs and 3 different dwarfs. And I just got a load of those and a few other little figures, but just keeping it really simple. So I painted up all the dwarfs, so I'm really happy with those, and I'm painting up the goblins next. And they're not very well done, but they're okay, and they look loads better than I could do when I was a kid. I think that's the other thing, because I'm sort of revisiting this as an adult. Somehow doing stuff that's better than I could do when I was 12 still feels like an achievement, even though probably as a grown man it's fairly pathetic.
I know. I was like that the other week. Like we had that game of Rangers of Shadow Deep, and I had all that terrain. And I was like, when I set the table up and I took a picture of it, and I was thinking, see if 10-year-old me could see this, he'd be absolutely amazed.
I think that there's a real thing there. I mean, just when you're talking about the idea of that kind of spectacle, when sometimes you see stuff that people paint that's like really high quality miniatures, you look at it and just think, well, I literally don't even think that that's being painted by a person. Mm-hmm. I can't believe it. And people sort of having a go at like the old White Dwarf things as if they were rubbish, but they were amazing, weren't they? They were absolutely unbelievable. And I just think people have set the standards too high and aren't getting any enjoyment unless they're really good at it. And I just think, well, what's that about? Surely you should be proud of anything that you do.
Mm-hmm. I wonder what this is not the main topic of our conversation, but I wonder what drove the quality to the extent it is today. I wonder if that is an internet thing where it's almost a competition now. Very few artists would probably admit that they're doing it to be the best or doing it to be better than everyone else. But humans are competitive, so I wonder if it's just constantly seeing pictures of other folks' stuff has just driven the quality to the way it is today.
Yeah, I'm convinced it is. If you look on Instagram at what people's houses look like, it appears that everyone that you know lives in an absolutely amazing show home, and it appears that everyone is completely flawless looking, and everywhere that they've been on holiday and every meal they've ever eaten is absolutely stunning. And you just think, well, I don't genuinely think that it reflects life. It doesn't mean that these people haven't painted these miniatures in this way. They have, but they've also taken a lot of time over curating the photograph and sort of thinking, how can this be posed in the best way, and how can I make this look absolutely stunning, and how can I sort of put on another layer of paint and go back and correct this and correct that and keep on refining it. Maybe they spend a huge amount of time on it. If that brings them enjoyment, I'm not to say that that's not worthwhile, but you shouldn't feel like you have to do that and that's the standard that you need to achieve. I do worry sometimes that the standard, I mean, my 2 children, I've got a 12-year-old and a 15-year-old, both girls, and it worries me that they're going to have life goals that are set by expectations that are very hard to reach. And just that whole thing of just being absolutely perfection all the time, it can make you pretty stressed out, actually. And that's not what this is about. Surely this is about relaxation, enjoyment, being able to just have a go at something, just make a mistake, don't worry about it, just have fun and be expressive and do it your way as well.
And that's the thing with the internet, and I know that there are famous artists out there who've put photos of their early work, but it's what you're not seeing often with artists. Like it's taken every one of the great painters such a long time to get to that standard. They've worked so hard at it, but we've seen the end product, and it reminds me a wee bit like I used to take my nephew to football training when he was like 10, 11 year old. And as him and his pals are sitting watching videos of Messi and Ronaldo doing all this stuff, and they're almost thinking like, I just need to be able to do that. And you're saying to them, look, that took them years and years of doing, practicing and getting the basics right. You don't just jump in at that level. And I think now it's difficult for younger folk to grasp that to be good at something takes time and effort. You can't just shortcut it.
Yeah, and I do think as well that as part of building a kind of internet brand, whether you've got a YouTube tutorial series or you're doing something on Instagram or whatever, there are a lot of people who are saying like, oh, yeah, I only got into this 2 months ago and look at what I could do. And you just think, no, you've probably been practicing this for a long time before that, because the standard, or they're just dedicating so much time to it because they're actually kind of almost trying to monetize their time and sort of, I don't know, it's not that it's not for me. I couldn't do it. But I also don't feel any less. Like if I paint a few figures and some of them look better than others, the actual experience of painting them was pretty similar. The end product really, in terms of what I can use and what I'm going to do it for. And I don't really want to just paint things and just shove them in a cabinet or anything like that. Rather, they just became useful things so that you can play a fun game and explore and I think we've got to make sure that we don't get too caught up with thinking that this is high art. There's not going to be in 400 years' time a group of sixth form students studying, an elf that someone's painted made out of plastic.
Maybe there will be.
Well, maybe there will. But I can't help but feel that you are basically colouring in a piece of plastic. I mean, that's fine. That is what you're doing. Don't worry about it and enjoy it. And do it so that you can then use that piece of plastic to have fun and recognise that it's a toy as well. I think that's something that I think is quite significant. And I feel like sort of what we're going to talk about later, the main topic of the conversation is sort of why younger people aren't perhaps getting into it. It just feels like it's very high stakes. And it also feels to me that the standard and the expectation is to create something that is a piece of art rather than something that is a gaming model that you're then going to be able to use to play a dice game with. Because basically, if you play Cluedo and you move the little guy around, you achieve what you're trying to do. And the fact that it's green, so you know that it's that person. That's all you need to know. They are just playing pieces, and there's enjoyment in creating them and painting them and doing what you want with them, and it's really fun. But I don't think that people need to worry that if I can't do that to a high standard, then I'm bad at this. And similarly, the stigma over unpainted miniatures as well. I'm not totally convinced by that. Certainly had a lot of fun playing with unpainted miniatures when I got that first Warhammer box or Hero Quest or whatever, because it would be a right shame if you felt that the thing you got for Christmas you couldn't use because it wasn't yet ready.
Yeah, I wonder if that's one of the big things that the hobby maybe struggles with, is getting that age bracket we're talking about, that you're 10, 11-year-olds in, because if they, like a modern, I'm not a big video gamer at all, but I've played like a couple of them in recent years, and like a video game, it'll guide you through it and it'll give you some quick early wins. It'll make you, you'll get a gun and you'll blast a few folks' heads off and you'll feel like, oh, I'm getting pretty good at this. Whereas it's not like that with a hobby, it's going to take more time to even feel like you've got those small wins. So that requires patience, and sometimes that's just, there's a lot of other stuff they could be doing rather than trying to get good at this.
Yeah, and I think as well, another side of it would be an element of understanding, like in a video game, before you go and play the multiplayer version and you're playing all your friends or whatever and trying to win, you probably will try it out, won't you, on that tutorial type learning curve mode and get okay at it. And it's quite a secure environment. No one's really watching you or judging you. You probably feel like you could do that sort of privately, really. Whereas there is an expectation that directly links social media presence and the hobby. So there's a sort of sense that you need to document what you're doing and put it online. I know for a lot of people, documenting what they're doing is actually a great motivator, and it allows them to sort of think, oh, really enjoying the progress and creating a diary really of what they're doing. But I don't think that needs to be a pressure where people feel that they have to be putting things on parade before they're ready for it. They should be able to have that safe environment before it becomes sort of socially visible. And therefore, they might have people making judgments about whether they can or can't do things. And there are some pretty unpleasant people on the internet as well who will say horrible things, even if it's to kids.
This podcast, I have a go at them all the time. But nobody's listening, so it's fine. How did you get into the hobby when you were wee, Mark, and how do you think that experience is different from how somebody might come across it today?
Yeah, so basically it's the classic Hero Quest story. And interestingly, if you listen to other podcasts that may be more like historical miniatures ones, slightly older guys, it's always like, oh, Airfix models. Basically they seem to be the two stories.
Aye.
And the common denominator there is that's something that was like advertised in mainstream media, so on the telly, in like children's magazines, on like Going Live and stuff on the telly. You could see this stuff, and you bought it from like a toy shop or Argos, and then you had it, and it was like very mainstream. So it was a gateway, but it was also the number of people who bought that and thought it was quite normal and didn't think it was like geeky or weird or anything was really high. It was just like, oh yeah, that's a normal thing to do. Probably a lot more boys than girls at the time, but still, it was pretty normal. And I think that gateway was the hook in. They did a really clever job on that Games Workshop of teaming up with Milton Bradley, because everyone bought Milton Bradley board games, but they still do. People's houses are chock full of ordinary board games, ordinary toys, things you can buy from Argos. And yet GW, you cannot buy their stuff other than by interacting with them, as far as I can tell. Not that I've particularly tried to, but it seems like they're kind of forged this sacred space where like, well, this is us and you need to come to us because we're very important. And I don't think they've done it to be elitist. I think they've done it because that's the business model that suits them. And with online retail, they can just be their own place, and they've got the retail stores still anyway. But you didn't need to know about Games Workshop shops. Like there was one, the nearest one to us was in Birmingham, and I didn't know that was there until I bought Hero Quest, and then got the little leaflet, and then you got to know a bit more about it. And like, oh, right, that's a thing. And then you saw White Dwarf in like W.H. Smith's or whatever. It was quite mainstream, normal stuff. You were experiencing this just as a kid, just finding out about, I don't know, how they would find out about Pokemon or whatever, just normal kids' toy brands. And I think that seems to be the missing piece of the puzzle, as far as I can tell. I can't see how someone who's 9 would really know what that genre of gaming was. Whereas D&D seem to have worked out how to do that.
Do you think it was Stranger Things, or do you think it's...
Yeah, no, I think that was a kickstart, isn't it? But it is interesting that actually the number of people playing it probably has been fairly consistent over the years. But you now do see, for example, like starter box sets in like Waterstones, and they're trying to tap into, well, where can you still buy board games? And let's just put the boxes in there. Why not? Yeah, maybe not all the stuff you can buy for that product, but they're just saying, well, you can buy the starter set. It's like 15 quid. If it doesn't work out for you, it doesn't really matter. I think that's quite important. Actually, rather strange things that you can find on the internet. I found old copies of the Argos catalogues that people have scanned and put online. And it's like found like the prices as well of these things. So like I found a 1993 Argos catalogue last night, and you could buy Warhammer 40k box sets, and they were £29.75. But to buy Risk was 25 quid or something. Like almost the same money. It was priced basically like, oh, it's just a slightly more expensive board game.
Yeah.
And you got loads
Yeah.
and loads of stuff in the box, absolutely loads. Whereas now it's like 105 quid or something like that. Whereas Risk will cost you still probably 25 quid. There's almost like some things have been inflation busting, but not
Yeah.
tabletop war games. They've gone, even if it's in line with inflation, it's still outrageously expensive by comparison with the rest of the market. So I think that gateway, that toy thing, that HeroQuest thing it was just a normal experience of just being able to buy a toy from a shop and just try it out. Quite low risk.
There was a kind of, how I compare the two, back then to today. So it was kind of like what I describe as a breadcrumb trail back in the day. Like for me, it was, combat cards, one holiday. What are these? Like, then I find a white dwarf and I see that the two are linked together, and it's, you get a leaflet. And these days, if you came across the hobby, jump on the internet, YouTube, bang, you get hit by a fire hose. You see all this brilliant painting, you see the prices, you see everything you'll need. You could be just turned off it within minutes. You could
I
just.
went on the Warhammer 40k bit of the Games Workshop website last night trying to find the price of 105 quid for the game. There is a cheaper one, but you get like 4 miniatures a side or something. It's a bit weird. And then they've got like these models on there as well, like these really expensive models that are really well painted, like £100. And I just can't help but think that kids will look at it and just go, well, I can't work out how this is for me. How is this something that's aimed at me? It looks like it's aimed at adults.
Do you know if GW? I mean, I don't know this myself. Are they still marketing at kids?
Well, there's a really interesting thing because I found something online just last night looking around. It was called, I can't remember what it's called. Something like Warhammer Alliance or something. And it's like a kids club thing for schools where you get sent as a school like a kit of stuff. And they send you like 10 Space Marines and 10 of those golden angel-y things. That like,
yeah.
you know the ones I mean. And so you get those and you get a little mini rule book thing. And you get it for your school to sort of set up a club. I mean, it's probably not enough to actually do stuff with, but it's just like a starting point. And what's really interesting is on their website, it's all branded up like really cartoony. But it's a little bit strange because it's really cartoony and light and fun and kiddie. But then the next step will be like a Space Marine like ripping someone's head off.
Yeah.
And it feels that it's just a bit weird. It's like it just sort of feels like they're going, well, let's try and make it for kids for a bit, but our actual main intellectual property is really aggressive and scary. So we're going to have to sort of segue into that, but there doesn't appear to be a progression through. Whereas I'd say that like HeroQuest felt sort of lighter and more fun. And like if you would like stuff like Thundercats or He-Man or whatever, then you'd be like, oh yeah, that looks a bit like that. I can cope with that. Because when you're 9, like Mumra was pretty scary, wasn't he? You didn't feel like
it
ready
wasn't
for
like disemboweling Panthro or anything, like blood everywhere.
Exactly.
he's up to his elbows in it.
Yeah, it's almost like it's Noel's house party, and instead of Mr. Blobby, it's Predator. And it just feels so jarring. And I think that people, kids aren't supposed to like stuff that's like Predator or Alien and yet the Warhammer 40k stuff especially, it's that level, isn't it? In terms of its maturity rating, if you like. It's not for children. It doesn't look like it is. I suspect it's a commercial decision because there's a lot of sort of youngish blokes who will spend a hell of a lot of money on collectibles and paint them up to a very high standard. I can't help but worry that they're not even that worried if they're painting the miniatures and just putting them on the shelf or just buying them and keeping them in the shrink wrap box and displaying them with those little things with the big heads that they'd have. It just feels a little bit like, are you actually aiming it at this collector market now of these guys who've got jobs, who've got plenty of spare money? And that's okay if they are, they're entitled to. But I do feel like that then does mean that I can't see how, and more like the 8, 9, 10-year-olds are going to sort of have the seed and kind of go, oh, that looks quite interesting. Yeah, the 14, 15-year-olds might find it fun, but actually that was probably the age that I was getting less interested by it and finding it a little bit like, no, I'm not sure if that's for me really, to be honest, anymore. As a sort of moving out, I think I enjoyed it most when I was about 12. probably the hobby. And that doesn't mean that's the same for everyone. Obviously, people have got different opinions on when they might have enjoyed it most. Probably because I wasn't interested in like competitive play. I wasn't interested in painting to the highest level. I always saw it as a low threat, relaxing, fun, light-hearted hobby. And that's kind of why I'm enjoying it now, having come back to it as an adult, just as a fun thing to do, just to sort of while away the time, like reading a Tintin comic or something. It's just light and easy and enjoyable and reminds you of better days.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's probably my experience of it probably resonates with some people, and people think, oh, yeah, I liked it like that. And other people are like, no, I really like the grimdark aesthetic, and I really like the sort of trying to max out my army and trying to win at a tournament. And I think that's absolutely fine, but that wasn't the experience for me. But I think that if you're going to try and hook in like an 8 or a 9-year-old, I think you need to make it probably much more like a toy, much more like a game. And that's probably where they've drifted away from, certainly GW.
Do you think, I was just about to ask, do you think GW, I know they're so huge, like they're probably bigger than everyone else put together, but do you think they're necessary for bringing in loads of people now? Because one of the big arguments is always they've got the shops on the high street and that, but again, I don't know much about 12-year-old kids, but do they even think of that anymore? Shops, physical shops, Asda's and the supermarket and stuff, but I wonder how much emphasis they put on there being a physical shop.
Yeah, not as much. And I don't think that they've got anything like as many shops as they had. I think they've contracted back to having them only in the main like regional centres, like the big cities. And those big cities are places that generally when you were 9, 10, 11, you're not going to be allowed to go on the train and go to Birmingham with your friends, when you're that age to walk round. It's full of people drinking in the day and bars and fashion shops. And it's a more adult environment, isn't it? A big city shopping street. I'm thinking of like high streets in ordinary towns and large villages, in up and down the country, that where they did have W.H. Smiths and Argoses and Woolworths. Those were the towns that were selling it to the people en masse, I think. And it was almost like the twice yearly pilgrimage to the big town to go to the Games Workshop was also a thing. But you went with your mum and dad. You weren't old enough to go on your own to go there, whereas you could just like go down to the town where you lived when you were a kid. Or go on your bike or whatever. So I think that maybe there's a bit of that, but also you don't see as many kids out going around the shops as a group of kids anymore. I think that there are more concerns that parents have got around safety and things, which, yeah, fair enough, the world's changed, a lot of traffic and there's dangers out there. But you don't, so I think that high street shopping experience is probably not so much a thing. However, where are the kids seeing about the products they do buy? All the fads that they have got, the fidget spinners and the this and that. They are picking it up on social media, but it's on the stuff that's geared up to kids, aren't they? Watching YouTube, toy unboxings, the stuff that's presented by other kids, the stuff that's got a childlike vibe to it. And I don't see the miniature wargaming stuff ever occupying any of that space.
So if it's if we say that, okay, these are the reasons that Games Workshop might be struggling to pull as much kids in these days, then it's probably down to things like schools, communities in schools, mentors or adults playing with kids. I would argue that that's actually a good thing, because none of these institutions or people are trying to sell the kids stuff, whereas GW, ultimately, their top responsibility is profit. So, they want to sell. Whereas if you've part of a war games group at your school or that, the person running that's not trying to sell you something, as far as I know. So maybe that's a better route. And
I think it is. I think that's a bit of an untapped market. I've had a bit of a search around and I haven't found many schools that have got war game societies. Some private schools do, some boarding schools do, where they've got a bit more time. But schools are perfect for this. If you think the kids haven't got their phones with them, they're not distracted, they're looking for stuff to do at lunchtime. Yesterday I was in the high school where I work, and there was kids playing cards. I said earlier, there were some kids at the middle school here. They were playing D&D out in the playground. There's kids who are just doing their homework. They're just sitting around chatting, doing very analog stuff. It would be a perfect environment to do that. You've got the space, you've got the big tables, you've got the big rooms. You can store things. You could have places where they could do painting, where they could set up a game. You could say, you could stay after school for a couple of hours and play. It does create that, and you could have adults as well, like pointing out the rules. Because I always feel like, your experience was probably similar to this. The idea that you actually knew how to play these games was a little bit overwhelming, wasn't it? because they are a step quite far beyond like a board game.
Mm-hmm.
So they're sort of, because you've got that freedom, like, well, if I move there, then what happens to that? And to have someone being a bit of an umpire, walking around and guiding people through it, I think schools would be an absolute perfect environment to do this in. I think teachers would be keen on it as well. I mean, there's obviously a lot of side benefits for doing this, in terms of strategic thinking, tactical thinking, mathematics involved, even if it's basic mental maths, doing dice rolls, adding modifiers, taking things off. It's got a lot of creative skills with the painting, and that you can build in a lot of stuff like you've talked with Nathan Stone, a lot of the stuff around the narrative and the stories. It can really be quite multifaceted. It's almost like, when you're at school, you put on a play and everyone would have a different role and people would bring their skills and experiences together and you create something bigger than the sum of the parts. You could imagine a school putting on like one of these really big battles. Like, we want to do a thing that looks like at the end of the Lord of the Rings, there's loads and loads of people everywhere all across the battlefield. Kind of thing you can't do at home. With cheap miniatures, which you can get now, cheaper than you ever could, and cheap terrain that you've made yourself out of loo rolls and paper mache or foam or whatever it might be, real basic stuff, you could create something amazing in a school and you'd remember it for years to come as well. So I think even if it didn't actually get you into buying more stuff and it didn't actually make you into a war game as something you'd identify with, it doesn't mean there's not value in it, because extracurricular clubs in schools, they offer a lot, but it feels like that sort of tabletop board games type area is often a bit neglected, but fits really well with schools.
Wonder what sort of things you can get kids involved. I wonder what then you do to keep them there, to make it stick with them, or is it inevitable? Like most of us have went through that thing where you put it away for, it could be decades and then come back to it later on. That could just be a natural thing for a lot of people, couldn't it?
I think it probably is a natural thing. I think I certainly wouldn't have had time to do it 10 years ago when my children were younger. That would have been difficult to do. I probably wouldn't have an inclination to do it 20 years ago when I was younger, because, you're out doing stuff and you've got a different outlook on life. So, yeah, I think there are points in your life where those things feel quite nice. I mean, I've tried to vaguely get my kids interested in it, and do you want to have a game? And they'll play with me at it. But like, do you want to paint something? It's like, nah, I don't really want to. Do you? And I think you can't push it on too hard. You can't, if it's not for someone, it's not for them. But what I'd like to see is it being more commonly accepted as being a perfectly valid and reasonable hobby, and not being written off as like a thing that happened as a blip at the end of the 20th century that is now just going to die out with a load of people because people won't do it anymore. Because people really enjoy analog hobbies. Yeah, it's a huge amount of people who are knitting, painting, sewing, drawing, baking. All these TV programs as well that are geared to these, to these activities, singing, making music. Yeah, the internet's here and it's on your phone and it's always with you. But people like doing normal stuff that they always ever have. And it feels to me like miniature wargaming, because it had that. I do think in the 90s it was at a bit of an all-time high, really, in terms of the number of kids that you could talk to. I remember at school, it wasn't the majority of us by any means, but like in my year group, so there was about 250 kids in our year. There must have been like 50 of us who were interested in Warhammer. And that's quite a lot, isn't it, really? And it's as many as were interested in, I don't know, not football, but other stuff, there's the next level below that, video games or tennis or whatever it might be, it was pretty popular and pretty normal. And yet the amount of people who are still doing that now, it will be a few of us who've come back to it. But I imagine, it just kind of goes through a cycle. I think it's whether you get that nostalgic pang at some point when you're in your late 30s and instead of going and buying a Porsche and having an affair, you decide to buy some goblins.
and have an affair.
Yeah, and your wife just looks at you and says, "Oh, I didn't realise I'd married my dad."
She's like, if you're having an affair, that's great news, because I was chucking you out anyway.
Exactly.
We talked, like you mentioned, Nathan, the episode with Nathan, we touched on, the old world coming back out or coming out in a new form, and we're talking about things like the accessibility, like monopose miniatures and how you you were quickly able to build those forces up really quickly. Do you think that is something that we'll need to see come around again to help this along?
Yeah, but I don't think it will happen. I don't think that Games Workshop will struggle to sell these toys at a lot of money per model. And if you look at, have you seen the War Games Atlantic figures that you can get?
Don't think so, no.
So it's a company that make these figures. They make some like fantasy things, and they make some historical ones, and you get like quite a lot in a box. Like, you get like 40 for like 25 quid. So it's pretty good value. But they also do these boxes where you get like 60, and they've got like some like Napoleonic Prussians, I think, and they're like literally like almost monopose. You just kind of cut them off, and I think they might put the head on, but other than that, they're like ready to go. And it's like they are like supposed to be from the second rank back in the unit. Just fill it out with these. They're cheap. Just buy them off us. They're very much trying to address that. And they're saying, well, no, we're not bothered about making loads and loads of money. We think that you might want this product. And I think they're just thinking they'll sell high volumes of the boxes themselves, because I suspect that GW will be thinking, we're not so bothered about volume. We're more bothered about unit cost and profit margin per item. I mean, the GW figures now are very fancy looking, aren't they? They look pretty amazing. But they've been sculpted by someone on a computer and then turned into a plastic sprue. So it probably have got a relatively similar manufacturing cost than they ever did when they were sculpted by someone turned into a plastic sprue. I can't see that being radically different. So the profit margin on them must be pretty high now. I think I just looked one up, and I think it was about 40 quid or something for like 5 Terminator Space Marines. Like, that's loads of money. 8 quid a model, that's loads, isn't it, for a piece of plastic? So, but if people don't mind spending it and they think, oh, they're brilliant and they're the only ones I want to get, then they'll buy them. I think that might happen with the old world, even though they're saying we need like loads of models. I don't really know much about it because I wasn't really interested in the hobby at all, but I get the impression that the 8th edition of Warhammer Fantasy Battle was like all about having like massive units. But they still will have cost loads of money and people still will have bought them.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that they just think a hardcore audience will just spend like literally £1,000 on figures.
Mm-hmm.
And buy an army, which is just for most people just absolutely absurd. Like,
yeah.
I've tried to buy these orcs and these dwarves, and I think like I've spent about 50 quid in total, or 40 quid or something in total, because I actually am getting a bit of pleasure out of the fact that it's very little money, and just sort of eking it out and keeping it really simple and really cheap. I like making my own terrain out, like bits of like stuff I was going to check in the recycling, because it's a bit of a buzz the fact you got to make it for free. So I think that I kind of hoped that they would do monopose and they would try and bulk it out and make it accessible and make it so that someone can come back to that. I just don't see them being the company to do that. And I like Mantic games. I think they're quite good. But I think at the same time, their prices have probably crept up quite a bit since when they started 10 years ago. And like their figures are more money now because they're getting better and they're just seeing that people will pay it, I suppose. I think you have to look for the much more kind of indie stuff, the indie manufacturers and like the indie rules. Well, you can buy rules, can't you? Or you can get rules for free. Like there's 1-page rules. I don't know if you've seen those. They're just literally free. And there's the Osprey books that are like, I don't know, a tenner. So I think there's still almost going to be two schools of thought. There'll be like the proper full-blown, this is the GW thing, you have to have the proper figures. I bet like that old world box set will be like £200. And that's a lot of money, isn't it, to shell out on something that you might well not use. And will you get an opponent who wants to play you? So for us kind of more nostalgic people who are kind of looking back to it, like I'm looking at this and I'm just having fun. But I genuinely don't know if anyone's going to particularly want to play with these figures. That's partly why I'm painting up the 2 armies, just for the sake of it, and try and twist my wife's arm and say, well, do you want to have a go? And it almost like I can't, or ask one of my friends, do you want to try it out? I've got the figures, you can come and have a go. I don't feel like there's going to be a massive community of people playing this. And GW do this as well. They release something, do it on a short run, make a load of cash, and move on. Maybe they won't, but I can't help but worry that they're very commercially driven, and that's fine. But if they are the guardians of the hobby, then it's not okay. I think that would be my comment on that, really. It depends what is their social and moral role when it comes to being the organisation that people look to, rather than the company, the organisation that people look to propel, especially in terms of fantasy and sci-fi gaming. I think historical's a bit different, isn't it? It's a bit more complex. But yeah, it's an interesting situation, isn't it? But I'd like to see it succeed, but I don't know. I do worry that it won't be the product that I'm interested in when it actually comes out, because I'll look at it and think, oh, it's really good, and then I'll really toss up what I want to buy and go, I can't afford this. I can't justify it. Maybe it's that.
Aye, and the basic business, the economics of it, not that I'm remotely qualified in anything to do with that, but like if you're a company with expensive products, you need fewer clients, basically. Whereas if you're selling something very cheap, you need lots of people to buy them, and people could do both. Companies could do both. I wonder too that, again, it probably goes back to the fact that a lot of kids will maybe get into this because somebody's told them about it and somebody's shown them how, rather than doing their own research, because it'll be really hard. Like the decision by paralysis, I think it's called. Like when you see the amount of miniature companies out there, the amount of rule sets and stuff, if there's nobody to guide you, you might just be so overwhelmed that you might just not get anything at all.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's something that where like if you had a club in a school, that would work really well, because you could just say like, oh, we've got these rules, and we're going to use these. We've got these toy figures, and you're going to paint them, and it would be quite instructed. And I think that would actually really help people understand what you can do, and then experience actually what the game feels like. At the moment, I worry that the amount of time before sort of finding out about it and then trying stuff before you actually have a game is a very long time, whereas that isn't true necessarily in other hobbies. Like if you decide that you're going to go and try to learn how to knit, you can buy 2 knitting needles and a ball of wool, look at how to do it, and start and make a very basic scarf or something like that. And you probably will achieve that fairly quickly. You'll certainly start seeing that the stitches are coming out and like, oh yeah, this is actually a thing, I'm doing it now. Or if you go and buy some paints and the canvas and just decide to paint a picture, it won't be very good, but you will create a picture that day and it'll be done.
Yeah.
And I do worry that because the hobby is quite unusual in that it's a sort of series of nested hobbies, but ultimately the end point of actually having played a game, you said it on one of your episodes where you were saying about how you tried Kings of War and you did it and you actually managed to play a full game. And at the end of it, you were like, oh, we did that and did it properly. And it actually worked. That must have been quite a sense of... Did you do that with miniatures, or did you use something else?
Yeah. We played. I basically built 2 armies, not huge armies, but maybe 6 units each. And 12-year-old me would have been proud.
Was it quite a long time before deciding you were going to do that until that day that you actually played it?
It was months had turned around, and
because you had prior knowledge of what it felt like, you were enjoying the journey. But for someone who was new to it, that journey would be hard to take, couldn't it? It's a bit like saying to kids, oh, we're going to go out for the day. Where are we going? Oh, you'll see when we get there. And you're still driving 9 hours later. They're not going to be having the best day out.
Today we're just looking at the map. We're looking at the road atlas. That's all we're doing today. That's it. It's that. I think you're working towards something, that feeling of progression. But if you're new to it, you maybe don't appreciate that up front.
I remember seeing the Hero Quest advert on telly, and I had a real strong sense of what the game would be like to play, because it was done well. It was visual and you could see it. It wasn't in any sense actually representative for really exactly what was happening, because it was all very dramatic and the kids were all calling things out and stuff like that. But it felt like, oh, I know what that game will be like to play. That was really good. So when you get it and you had to clip off all the things, I remember getting it for, I think I must have got it for my birthday. For some reason, we were actually on holiday, and I was clipping off all these sprues in the hotel and just like doing all this, punching out little bits of cards and getting it all ready. And then we actually managed to play it, well, like with my sister and my dad, I think, when we were on holiday. And it was really good. And it was like what that advert was like. It was really exciting. But I think if I'd have just, not that it would necessarily happen, but just been given the box and like, here's all this stuff, and you're on holiday, like, oh, I'm going to have to set all that up. I might have thought, oh, that looks a bit complicated. I'll have a think about doing that. But I remember when I was clipping all these things off, I was very much thinking about that TV advert and like, this is what it will feel like to have a go at this. And I think that idea of war games shows and conferences and like there's games days and things, you saw stuff being played, and you can go to the Games Workshop shops, couldn't you? And people were playing the games, and you saw it happening, and you're like, oh, I could do that. I could be doing that. I could be the one involved in that. So the progression and the time that you had to put in, which became quite enjoyable because you have a real clarity over what the goal was. Whereas at the moment, the clarity of the goals appear to me more towards the aesthetics, like here's a really fancily painted model, or here's an amazing army list that will like beat someone else's. And it's like, okay, but that's quite abstract. I want to see it happening. And I don't know what your experience in this is, but I tried watching a battle report on YouTube, and I found it literally bewildering. Like the camera was moving, and it was apparently a reasonably good one, but like I couldn't focus on it. I didn't think I was there, and I genuinely didn't. It didn't inspire me to play the game. It actually made me go, "Oh, that's a bit confusing. Don't really understand what's going on." Just turned it off after about 3 minutes. I mean, that might be just me not being able to focus on that, and that not being my kind of thing. But I don't know. It's a bit like, watching football on the telly is all right, but if you actually go to a game, it is it's a lot more inspiring, isn't it? You have a real sense of like, that's a real thing, real people doing it. I could do that. So I think seeing it done is a really important part. Maybe that's what the internet doesn't do very well. Maybe that's where the actual physical venues and locations comes in, and that may be what kids aren't seeing.
Yeah. Aye, and getting hooked by something after having done it, like I could imagine that for the right kid at the right moment, a game, I talk about it a lot on the show, Song of Blades and Heroes, very, very simple, small scale skirmish game. You could pick it up really fast. Even I picked it up. I'm daft, but I could imagine the right kid at the right moment playing a game of that and thinking that was great, let's do it again, and just getting that wee bug. And also, like, we've mentioned Hero Quest a lot. It gets mentioned on the show a lot for all the right reasons. One of the games that I don't think gets the credit it deserves for that era was Battle Masters, because
that was really good.
It gave you that. Like, I was reading White Dwarfs at that time, looking at Warhammer. I don't know if I owned the Warhammer box set at that point, but Battle Masters gave me that mass fantasy battle in a box. It literally was set up on Christmas Day, if I remember correctly. It had a nice mat. It was hexagonal. The units were very easy to build because they were multi-based. There was a wee castle. You had your scenery. You had a cannon. Ogres. You had everything, and that was just so accessible and such a brilliant, simple game as well. Don't think I played it completely to the rule book, but it was something that me and my pals got out again and again and had a game of.
I think you're right. I think that's a really good example. It's so really tactile, isn't it? And did it have like a cannon you physically shot stuff? Did you physically shoot the cannon? Or
it was a miniature, but just the fact that you immediately had all this stuff made you feel brilliant.
But it was like a plastic. It was like a twister type map, was it? Was it?
It was like a rubbery.
But
on hindsight, it probably wouldn't have aged very well.
But you say that. But I think that's really interesting because the stuff was obviously like probably fairly robust plastic. It probably felt like a toy, and it felt like you could kneel on it and lean on it. It doesn't matter. Whereas now, I feel like it'd be like, oh my god, you're on ceremony, and you're in this is a master crafted diorama, and thou shalt not touch it. And that's what I don't think it. That's where I don't think it's inspiring for kids. I think it does need to be a bit back to basics and a bit simple. I think that's where the plastic miniatures come in really well, and a quick paint job. Get them on, just play with them. Don't worry about being too finicky about stuff, and don't worry about if you chip a bit of paint off, because you can just put a bit more paint on, can't you? And it's that type of attitude that I think is probably not there because it's all about the perfection. The plastic sort of toys of nature as well of Hero Quest. I mean, I didn't paint my models in the Hero Quest set. I think I might have painted the little 4 people that you had, like the characters. I didn't bother painting the other people. It didn't bother me. It still were, it was a skeleton. It was fine. It did the job. It was obviously a board game as well. Whereas it's very interesting when people talk about like realism and making it like, oh, this is going to be very realistic, and you're aiming towards a point of realism, and certainly with terrain and all these things. You think, yeah, but you're under no illusions. This is, there are not 112 goblins running across your dining room table. This is pretend.
Aye.
And so it's kind of important that kids kind of recognise it's a toy and that you can just have fun with it, certainly first, and then they'll build their skill and get better at painting and get better at the modelling and then make stuff that maybe does look a bit more diorama level, but when you're ready to. I think White Dwarf was quite encouraging of that. You used to get instructions, didn't you? I had to make little like cardboard houses and quite simple stuff.
House,
yeah. Whereas now they want to sell you something that's like £100 for a little plastic little, throne or something. And it's a different model, isn't it? So I think the White Dwarf always felt like it was on our side as kids, and it felt like it was written to kids. That was almost my impression as well. Like, it felt like you were supposed to be 12 if you were reading it. I think if you saw a 25-year-old reading White Dwarf in the 1990s, you might think they're a bit strange.
Yeah. It was always kids that won that prize as well. They're sitting while the game's round up. Imagine just like a 40-year-old man with like a beer belly sitting amongst it. Folk would be like, what the fuck are you doing taking those games off of some kid? So,
yeah, it is. It's like the Pied Piper. Yeah. It does feel like that's changed. And I think it's probably a case of almost trying to say, well, what can we do? And in terms of the sort of what the answer is, I don't know. But I do think when I've done a bit of Googling, one thing I can't find is not only can I not find many schools that are running wargame clubs, but I can't find a resource for teachers that says, look, how about this? This is the educational benefits. Here's some lesson plans. Here's some structure. Here's some things you can do. At the school where I'm at today, like they've got this really cool thing that Formula One do, which is like a Formula One engineering challenge thing. And, they make all these paper cards. They print out the cars and then they put a bike pump and it blows them across the floor. And it's all like that. It's all just like a print and play kind of kit that you get off the Formula One website. And loads of organisations do this. My wife works in a school and she got some really interesting history resources off the Samuel Johnson birthplace, and got some really good lesson plans, and they just make it available for free because they're a charity. I think we almost need an organisation that is almost there to say, well, we are the people who want to promote this, and here's some free stuff you can get. Here's some links. So here's some free rules, or here's some simple rules, or try doing it this way, or this is where you can learn about painting miniatures, or this is where you can buy things from. And it's very agnostic, and it's trying to take a step back, not trying to make any money, but just be there as just a hub for the education community. Well, even that, and that would include parents as well. Just people are like, yeah, I want to teach people about this, or scout groups and Girl Guides, whatever it is. That kind of environment, I just think would be perfect for it. I think sometimes it's got a bit of a negative rep as well, hasn't it, in the past? I remember perhaps some parents thinking that maybe it was a bit violent to play like war games. It was a bit not very nice because you're killing monsters and you're killing things. And I think that if they saw the GW stuff now, they'd be probably fairly rightfully worried. This does look too mature and too violent for my children. So I think that maybe that more Hero Hammer kind of fun look as well is probably part of the thing that appeals to me going back. Is it's not too scary, it's not too horrible. The world's pretty grim anyway. We already live in the grim dark future, don't we? So
yeah.
Sometimes it's quite nice to look back to what they thought the grim dark future was going to be like in the 90s. It seems quite cheery by comparison.
Do you think there's a lot of that too, like buying into a completely new story world? Like if you're going to play GW stuff and it's the Warhammer world or it's the Age of Sigmar universe or whatever they call that thing, it's it's learning a completely new universe and stuff like that. I wonder if kids are maybe, and people in general, just have so much room for stuff like that.
Yeah, I think so. I remember in the early 90s, like the Warhammer world was just like literally a total, utter Tolkien knockoff. And quite unapologetically, and obviously lots of Michael Moorcock stuff around the chaos and all that kind of thing. It's cool, but I remember just at the time being like totally in my comfort zone. It's like, yeah, the few fantasy books that I've read at that age, that's this, that is this, that's fine. I know what a dwarf is. I know that they might live in the mountains, and I've got this little map of the old world in White Dwarf, and it looks basically like Europe. It also looks a bit like a Middle Earth map you might get in Lord of the Rings. I get it, it's fine. It's all very digestible. Whereas like, the stuff now is like, these different, very high fantasy, very complex, and the kind of thing that is a little bit bewildering. I think that the more low fantasy, basic kind of stuff that kids can get their head around. Most kids' books, or most kids' fantasy books, my younger daughter still reads quite a lot of stuff that's like this. It plays the same themes, the stuff that you think, yeah, I can kind of cope with that. I know what a wizard's like. I know what a dragon's like. I know what an ogre would be. And I know that the fact that they probably live in a sort of pseudo-medieval world, it just feels like actually sticking to those basics rather than trying to invent something that can become a property in its own right that you can syndicate for video games and films and toys and so on. It's less profitable because it's so derivative that you can't really copyright anything, but it's actually a lot easier to latch onto and just go, oh yeah, I know where I am. I know what's going on. I quite like that about the fact that like these orcs that I've got and these dwarves that I've got, and I'm using the dragon rampant rules. I just think I literally don't really care where they're from or live or what the world is. It's just as simple as some fantasy creatures having a battle because they are. And I think that sometimes wrapping your head around the real complex, the lore, is something that it feels like it's something that you need to be able to get your teeth into first. Well, you need to get your foot in the door before you can get teeth into it. So with the Warhammer stuff, when we were younger, reading it was like, yeah, it's very familiar. And then you'd read a story about like, I don't know, Gotrek and Felix and go, oh, they're quite cool, quite like them. But contextually, they felt like they were living in an environment that you already had prior understanding of. I think that matters. So, and in the same way that, if kids are going to do sci-fi stuff, they probably might want to do things that are a bit Star Warsy or whatever. Fine. Why wouldn't they? That's sort of a reference point they understand. Whereas the very specialist, the GW approach is very much like you need to know the things before you're allowed in our door. So it feels a little bit prohibitive.
Mark, I think you said you had to be off on the hour. Anything that you quickly wanted to touch on, or any link you want to point to, or anything like that?
Well, I'll tell you what, while talking, it's kind of made me realise that maybe I should actually pull my finger out and create some kind of website with resources and collate them all together for people who are working in education or in community settings and clubs and social environments to have stuff. And maybe it's something that I'll do, try and pull something together. And if I do, I think now I've said it, saying it on a podcast is a good way of holding yourself to account, probably, isn't it?
Yeah, if you want something done, do it yourself and all that.
Publicly. Yeah, but so I'm wondering about doing that, just putting something really simple together that just actually has got some links and kind of bringing some information in, maybe reaching out to other people in the community, like people like yourself and people you've had on as guests, to say, well, do you want to contribute something? Do you want to contribute an article and point people in the right direction? Because I think there's an appetite for this. And I mean, at the moment, the vast majority of secondary schools up and down the country have got kids who have got 45 minutes to an hour on their hand at every lunchtime, who haven't got their phones, are trying to do something, want to recharge their batteries before the next set of lessons. And, actually a club like this would go down a treat in a lot of places. I think really the other thing I'd really love to see is more girls getting interested in it. Just really quickly on that, actually, I've got stuff for Frostgrave, and I very intentionally bought the female wizards and the female soldiers. And my youngest daughter thinks it's great, and she's played with it a couple of times with me. And it does feel more like it's her, and it does feel more inclusive, whereas previously it was very male orientated. Even to the point where you imagined that the orcs were probably male. But it doesn't need to be that way. Things can be a bit broader and more inclusive as well. So that's my pledge. Then I think I'll
hold you to that.
I've no idea how to do it
in a few months and
find
out how you've got on.
Excuse to weasel my way out of it. Well, thank you very much for the time.
I know it's been great, Mark. I really appreciate it. Thanks for your insights, and we'll definitely touch. I hate that term. I don't know why I say it. Touch base. Really hate that. It's a really corporate sort of term. We'll speak to each other in a while, and I'll find out.
It's both corporate and also slightly sleazy sounding.
I know. I don't know why I said that. We'll catch up. Yeah,
we will. No, that's really good. Well, thank you very much, and best wishes with everything. Because, like I said on my survey that were filled in, that you're probably going to plug in a minute, is that this is a really useful podcast, because I really feel like this is it's kind of sits at the nucleus between a lot of the other podcasts that I listen to. It really feels like it's coming from my perspective, which is really interesting. Actually, I think it's probably because some of the other people are very, very heavily invested in a certain area of it. Like there's this, some of them are very, very detailed, aren't they? And I like them, but I'm not at that level. Whereas I feel like you take a really nice, broad, almost magazine type approach to it, talking to different people from different walks of life, and really appreciate that.
Big thanks to Mark there. Great guy, great conversation. And please get in touch with me if you're interested in potentially helping out with that resource that he's planning to put together too. Thanks also to you for listening. You know all the usual links by now, or at least you should. bedroombattlefields.com/podcast, bedroombattlefields.com/survey, and we've now got bedroombattlefields.com/worst Patreon ever. That's all one word. Genuinely, that'll work if you type it into your Commodore 64. Okay, enough for now. Joe McCulloch's back on the show soon. That'll be cool. In the meantime, stay subscribed, follow us on TikTok, and smash the like bell or something like that. Cheerio for now.